So what is Docker? Docker is the leader. Docker is an organization actually. Docker now can be said as an open source platform with which we are going to implement containerization. Are there competition to Docker? Yes, there are competitions to Docker. We do have substitutes to Docker also. So what is Docker? Here I said we need some engine. Like hypervisor is there, we will need some engine. That engine can be a Docker engine. So Docker is an open platform which I'm going to use on a dev box development, which I'm going to also use for shipping of my images and also to create running applications which are nothing but containers. So Docker is a way to implement containerization, and Docker is so popular that containerization and Dockerization is same. They are like synonym in the industry. Most of the time when you're implementing containerization, you're actually implementing through Docker, though there are alternatives. So Docker enables you to separate your application from your infrastructure so that you can deliver the software quickly. How? What we are going to do is, as a developer, I'm going to build my application. Understand this very carefully. If I'm a .NET developer, I'll write my code in .NET, build the entire application, test it locally, ensure that everything is working fine. Likewise, if somebody is a Java developer, somebody is a Python developer, they would also ensure that their application is working absolutely fine locally. And now they want to distribute this application, and that is the point when they are going to implement containerization for their application. How? They are supposed to write something called as Docker file. See, every development language has certain process to convert their source code to the binaries and then to the machine code executable format to execute them. Let it be .NET, let it be Java, let it be Python. There is a procedure for build and execute. So this procedure of build and execute, I'm going to implement through a file called as Docker file. An instruction set through which we are going to build a Docker image. So I, as a developer, I'm responsible for writing a Docker file. And using the Docker file, we will convert our entire application into a Docker image. This Docker image, I'm then going to put it into a registry. What is registry? Think of registry like your Play Store. You have Google Play Store and iPhone Store, iStore, where on your mobile you install your applications from. But somewhere some developer has put the application there, right? So what we are going to do now is, there is something called as Docker registry. There are many Docker registry. One which is very commonly used is Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a registry where after I build an image locally, I'm going to push it into the Docker Hub. Once I push the image into Docker Hub, from Docker Hub, others can download the image into their local registry. That means on every machine where we want our application to run, we have to set up Docker engine. That means some software has to be installed, which is nothing but a Docker software. So once we have a Docker application installed on our machine, we can download those images and run those images by creating containers locally. Maybe by the end of this session, I'll demonstrate that entire life cycle to you. How you can take the base image, on top of it, add your own custom files, build a custom image, upload into Docker registry, on another machine, maybe download it and create a container and use it. So distribution of Docker application is so easy that it's only involved pushing an image into the respective registry. And once it is moved into the registry, from there, on whichever platform you want, basically whichever environment you want, you can download and use it. So in context of benefits, yes, very resource efficient. As I told you, there is no OS. The kernel of the host is going to be used. And because the kernel of the host is used, the applications are very fast. They start up also very fast. They don't have to load the OS. If I have to create a virtual machine, I'll have to wait 2-3 minutes. Docker applications will just start. They are fast and consistent delivery of your application. Once an image is built, you can simply take the same image and deploy wherever you like. And the entire process of constructing an image, deploying into different environments, testing, moving forward can be automated through a DevOps practice. So modern applications, which are mostly implemented through Agile, are now implemented through containerization, distributed through containerization. So yes, if you are a developer, you're going to write code locally and share the work with the colleagues by using Docker containers. That means you're going to construct a Docker image, upload the image into the registry, and then once you upload the image into the registry, you can download the image in different environments. Let it be dev environment, let it be test environment, let it be QA environment, or let it be UAT environment, and then finally maybe into the production environment. Same image is going. Because it's the same image, can I say we will bring consistency? It's not that we'll have to reconstruct the environment every time by installing the individual software. No. And that makes things much easier when it comes to Docker for distributing applications through a DevOps practice. And today Docker is so popular that it is implemented on Mac, Windows, and Linux. There is something called as Docker desktop software. Yes, of course, until this January to 2023, it was absolutely free. Anybody could just download and install Docker desktop. But nowadays, Docker desktop is supposed to be purchased, especially when you're working for a large organization. There is a number, maybe I think 300 plus employees if an organization has, or if they have some turnover beyond one particular number, that organization compulsory should buy license for Docker desktop for their developers. But if you are a small organization or medium organization, less than that limit, whatever limit they have put, you can still use Docker desktop absolutely free. So if you are using by any chance Windows box or a Mac box for development, Docker desktop is the best choice you can install on your machine. So question can be, Sandeep, Mac OS. So do you think Mac supports Dockerization? Actually, no. When we create Docker images, they are either Windows images or they are Linux images. There is no concept of Docker images for Mac. Yes. Docker images for Mac is not there. Mac, Windows 10, Windows 11. All these are operating systems for desktops. Docker primarily is targeted for applications which run on server. Something like a web server based application, or a service which runs on the server which can be consumed by multiple client machines, client applications. Docker is never used for desktop applications. For example, Notepad, Paintbrush. No, you'll never use Docker for these kind of things. Docker is primarily for server side applications. That means server operating system. Windows, Linux, Windows Server, Linux Server. Maybe different versions of Linux. Let it be CentOS or let it be Ubuntu or whatever. But only for server we are going to have Docker based application, not for client side GUI based application. Be very clear. Then what is the role of Mac OS? Whether it is Mac OS or Windows 10 or Windows 11 today, we can install Docker desktop as a developer. But when we are building the image, compulsory we have to build the image for the Linux or Windows. Mac supports, Mac OS Docker desktop supports creating images per Linux. So what it does, Mac OS on top of it creates a Linux virtual machine, and for this virtual machine it will create images. Windows has an advantage. Windows 10, Windows 11 if you are using, you can build images for Linux as well as for Windows Direct. So and you have a switch. For example, on my machine I have Docker Desktop. This is Docker Desktop. I've already installed. So if I right click on Docker Desktop icon, you see there is an option to switch from Linux to Windows containers and Windows to Linux containers. So when I'm on Windows here, that means my configuration currently is Linux. How does it work on Windows Linux images? WSL. Windows subsystem for Linux. Windows 10 is the base. On top of it, we will have WSL. And this WSL layer will be used for constructing images for Linux, though the base operating system is Windows. But when I switch to Windows container, the WSL layer is gone and we directly build images for Windows. So yes, if I can show you, I right now go to the command prompt and type a small command docker version, and you'll see that here this is Docker engine. A Docker engine is going to have a server side component. Docker engine is going to have a server side component which right now is Linux and AMD 64. Whereas you see Docker client is Windows box. That means Docker client is directly running on my Windows machine and is going to talk to a Docker server which is running in WSL, which is Linux based. A WSL layer is added on top of Windows. Now let's see what happens if I switch. Right click, I'll say switch to Windows container. The moment I switch to Windows container and again execute Docker version, now you see Docker client still remains on Windows, but Docker daemon, Docker engine now has changed to Windows. So my Docker client is same Docker client will send instructions to either Linux or Windows based on how I have configured it, and I'm able to switch from one platform to the other platform for constructing images. Images which I build when I'm in Windows mode will not work on Linux. Images which I build in Linux mode will not work on Windows. They are respective operating system specific because the kernel is supposed to be of the host operating system. So yes, Docker Desktop is a special software on Windows which will let you to build images not only for Windows, but also it will let you to build images for Linux with the help of WSL. That's the beauty of Docker Desktop. Then we have got server. Yes, Docker server can also be installed on, this is the production actually. The production version is always Docker server, Linux distribution or Windows server distribution. For development, we might use this, but for production, we are always going to use a Docker server software on the respective server operating system. Beauty is today, if you're working with some cloud, maybe Amazon AWS or Google GCP or Microsoft Azure or IBM or any other popular cloud, you will see that Docker is provided there also as a service. And most of the time it is platform as a service. How does it all work? Open Container Initiative, OCI we call it, is an open governance which actually Docker only created for express purpose of creating open industry standard around container formats and runtime. So Docker started this OCI so that anybody should be able to create images. So in that there is a runtime spec and there is an image spec. And this is common. This is common. The deals with containers in the abstract way. So you have, as I said, equivalent of Docker, like Podman is one very popular alternative to Docker. The closest possible alternative to Docker is Podman. And then we have got RKT and Mesos. All these are pathetic. Podman, I would say, probably lot of people would use alternative to Docker. But others are not at all close, pretty far. So yes, Docker is the leader in the industry for implementation of containerization, though we have got open container initiative and that can be implemented through other vendors too.